All right, buckle up, everybody. We're diving deep into some serious military strategy today.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is. We've got excerpts from, get this, the Marine Corps doctrinal publication 1.0.
The MCDP 1.0.
Yeah, you know it. All about offense and defense.
The push and pull of warfare.
Exactly. It's basically the Marines playbook, right?
You could say that. It lays out how they think about and conduct warfare, and the selections you've pulled focus on the interplay between, like you said, offense and defense.
And there's this one thing that really caught my eye. This idea that winning on the defense can be incredibly hard.
Yeah.
You'd think having the advantage, dug in, prepared positions, it'd be easier.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. See, the MCDP 1.0, it emphasizes that offense and defense, they're not two separate things. They're inseparable.
Inseparable.
Yeah, constantly influencing each other. It's not like, oh, offense is always better, defense is the key. It's way more nuanced than that.
So it's more like a dance than, say, a boxing match.
Exactly. And to really grasp this, let's go back in time a bit. Back to the Korean War.
Okay, taking this back.
Remember the 1st Marine Brigade's stand at the Pusan perimeter?
Oh, yeah, classic stuff. Desperate defense, holding on by a thread.
Outnumbered, outgunned, the whole 9 yards. But it wasn't just about holding that one piece of ground, was it?
No, I guess not. There had to be something more to it.
Right. By holding the line at Pusan, tough as it was, they bought time. Precious time that allowed for the Incheon landing.
Ah, the Incheon landing. Brilliant offensive maneuver. Completely turned the tide of the war.
Exactly. So the defense at Pusan, though grueling, set the stage for that decisive offensive victory at Incheon.
Wow, so even in a tough defensive situation, they were setting up for a future offensive win.
It's all connected. And this isn't just ancient history. Even in modern conflicts like Operation Desert Storm, you see this interplay.
Oh, how so?
While coalition air power was pounding Iraqi defenses, softening them up, the ground forces were busy preparing their own defensive positions.
So ready to repel a counterattack.
Exactly. Always anticipating, always thinking several steps ahead.
It really makes you appreciate the layers of strategy involved.
It's never just attack or defend. It's this constant back and forth, this ebb and flow.
A real dance, like you said.
Right. And that brings us to the concept of defense itself. MCDP one-way quotes Karl von Clausewitz, who said, and this is a powerful image, "A sudden, powerful transition to the offensive, the flashing sword of vengeance, is the greatest moment for the defense."
Wow, okay, that's pretty intense.
It is. Defense isn't about passively taking punches, it's about resilience.
Resilient.
Yeah, maximizing your strengths, using the terrain to your advantage.
So buying time, wearing down the enemy.
And waiting for that perfect moment to unleash a counterattack, that flashing sword.
So defense, it's not necessarily about winning outright, but about setting the conditions for a successful offense.
You're getting it. And a great example is the Battle of Can Nas in Vietnam. Brutal siege, but the Marines held on, inflicted heavy losses on the North Vietnamese army, ultimately forcing them to withdraw.
Their defense was key to their success.
It was well-planned, focused on resilience, leveraging the terrain.
So much more to it than just digging in and hoping for the best.
Way more. But hold on, MCDP 1.0 doesn't stop there. It talks about different types of defense, too, like mobile defense and area defense.
Okay, so now we're getting even more specific.
Right. So mobile defense, that prioritizes maneuverability.
Maneuverability, like moving around.
Yeah. It's about hitting the enemy when they're overextended, luring them into traps, exploiting their weaknesses.
Not just holding any one position, but choosing your battles.
Exactly. Think of a skilled boxer, bobbing, weaving, waiting for that perfect opening for a knockout punch. But to pull this off, you need greater mobility than the attacker.
Which brings to mind things like air power, tanks, right? Like in Operation Desert Storm, the Marines used their aviation and armor to move quickly, dictating where the engagements happened.
A textbook example of mobile defense. They outmaneuvered the Iraqi forces, choosing when and where to strike.
Very cool. And how does area defense differ from this more agile approach?
Area defense, that's about holding specific terrain. Picture fortified positions, obstacles, minefields.
Like a fortress, almost.
Exactly. It's tough to crack, but less flexible than mobile defense.
So the choice between the two depends on the situation, the
Yeah.
goals, the terrain, all those factors.
There's no one-size-fits-all in warfare, but imagine applying these concepts to something like, say, a business trying to protect its market share.
Okay, I like where this is going.
A big, established company might use area defense, focusing on fortifying their existing strengths. But a small startup trying to disrupt the market, they might use mobile defense, being more nimble, finding those weak spots in the big guys.
Fascinating. So these military concepts, They can be applied outside the battlefield.
Absolutely. The principles are universal. It's about understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, the terrain you're operating on, and choosing the right approach for the situation.
I'm starting to see how this applies to so many things.
You got it. But what happens when even the best defense needs to make a strategic shift? MCDP 10 talks about retrograde operations, which sounds way more planned out than just a simple retreat.
It does, yeah. Like a retreat with a purpose.
Exactly. A retrograde is a controlled movement away from the enemy. It's not giving up, it's achieving a goal.
Like what kind of goal?
Buying time, repositioning forces, even luring the enemy into a trap. It's all part of a bigger plan.
So like a strategic retreat, not just running away.
Right. And there are different types: delays, withdrawals, and retirements, each with its own complexity. Think about a delay, a smaller force holding back a larger one, buying time for the main force to maneuver.
Wow, so even falling back can be a strategic move.
It's about maximizing the effectiveness of every unit, even when they're seemingly retreating.
That's incredible. Every move, even backward, can be part of a bigger plan.
You're getting it. That adaptability, that strategic thinking, it's core to the Marine Corps. Now, we've talked defense, but how about when it's time to go on the offensive?
That's what I'm waiting for. I mean, MCDP 1 it doesn't shy away from aggressive action.
Oh, not at all. In fact, it quotes General Holland M. Smith, who said, and get ready for this, "Hit quickly, hit hard, and keep right on hitting. Give the enemy no rest. This is the shortest road to victory."
Okay, that is a quote and a half.
Right. It embodies that Marine Corps spirit. But even with that aggressive mindset, they don't just charge in blindly. MCDP 10 outlines 6 forms of offensive maneuver: frontal attack, flanking attack, envelopment, turning movement, infiltration, and penetration.
Whoa, 6. That's a lot of options.
Each with its own strategy and purpose, all about leveraging surprise, mobility, and the unique strengths of your forces.
It's like a whole toolbox of offensive options.
Exactly. Maybe we could take a closer look at one of the most audacious maneuvers, the turning movement.
The turning movement, all right? I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So picture this: a wide maneuver aimed at striking deep behind enemy lines, completely bypassing their main defenses. Like a chess player making a bold move to outflank their opponent?
Attacking from an unexpected angle? That's got to be disorienting.
It is. It's not just brute force, it's about strategic positioning and surprise. And I bet you can guess a classic example.
Let me think. Oh, the Incheon landing.
You got it. General MacArthur, landing forces behind enemy lines, completely caught the North Koreans off guard.
Risky, but it paid off big time.
Changed the course of the war. The Incheon landing is the embodiment of a well-executed turning movement.
So it's not just about being aggressive, it's about being smart, unpredictable.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial element, one that applies to both offense and defense: never going into a situation blind.
Okay, so this is about reconnaissance and security, making sure you've got the intel before you act.
You got it. MCDP 10 is very clear on this. It quotes the Small Wars Manual. The most certain method to uncover an enemy is to send scouts to visit suspected positions.
So just like you wouldn't make a major business decision without understanding the market, the Marines always make sure they know what they're dealing with before they act.
Exactly. Gathering information about the enemy, the terrain, everything.
Like a learner assessing the information landscape before diving in.
Great analogy. And there are all sorts of reconnaissance missions tailored to gather specific information: route reconnaissance, area reconnaissance, zone reconnaissance, force-oriented reconnaissance.
Wow, so many different ways to scout.
Each serving a specific purpose, ensuring the Marines have a clear picture before they make any decisions.
So depending on the mission, you gather the right intel. But what happens when the enemy is trying to do the same to you?
Ah, that's where counter-reconnaissance comes in. One of the most fascinating parts of information warfare.
Oh, this sounds juicy. Tell me more.
It's a constant cat-and-mouse game, disrupting the enemy's attempts to gather intel while protecting your own assets.
So actively hunting out their scouts while also concealing your own movements.
Exactly, denying them that crucial information advantage.
This constant battle for information, it's amazing. There's so much going on behind the scenes.
Always. The Marines, they really understand that information is a weapon, and they're masters at wielding it. But, you know, even with all this reconnaissance and security, there are times when you need specialized tactics.
Oh, right. MCDP 10 does mention some other tactical operations, and some of them sound pretty intense.
They can be, but they're essential tools for the Marines, letting them adapt to all sorts of battlefield situations.
Like what kind of situations are we talking about?
Think passages of lines, link-ups, reliefs in place, obstacle crossings, even breakouts from encirclement.
Okay, yeah, those do sound pretty high stakes.
They can be, but they're all about maintaining the initiative no matter what the battlefield throws at you.
All right, let's break down some of these specialized tactics. What exactly is a passage of lines? It sounds complicated.
Imagine two lines of troops, one stationary, and the other needing to move through them, either forward or backward.
Oh, wow. So like one unit weaving through another. And under fire, potentially?
It happens. It takes incredible coordination and communication to avoid creating vulnerabilities in the formation.
I can imagine. It's like threading a needle with a whole battalion.
Exactly. And MCDP 10 points out that this happens a lot, especially during security operations.
Okay, so give me an example.
Say security forces falling back, but they need to maintain contact with the enemy. They have to hand off their sector to the main force seamlessly with no gaps in the defense. That's where a smooth passage of lines is critical.
Wow, it's all about maintaining that continuous line, even while moving.
You got it. It takes a lot of trust and communication between the units involved.
Absolutely. So what about link-ups? Are they as stressful?
Link-ups are a little different. It's less about maintaining a line and more about joining forces in a hostile environment.
Okay, I'm following.
Could be two ground forces converging, or a helicopter-borne force linking up with ground troops, or even relieving a unit that's been surrounded.
Ah, so it's like two pieces of a puzzle coming together to form a stronger unit.
Exactly. And just like with passages of lines, coordination is key. They need to agree on meeting points, fire support plans, who's in command, all of that.
Makes sense. You can't just bump into each other in the middle of a battlefield.
Definitely not. Okay, now reliefs in place, those are different again. This is where you completely swap out one unit for another in a specific area.
Got it. So fresh troops rotating in, giving the other unit a break?
That's one reason. Could also be to reposition forces for a new mission. But it's not as simple as just swapping personnel.
Right. I imagine there's a lot more to it than that.
Absolutely. The transfer of responsibility has to be seamless. No gaps in the defense, no disruption in operations. MCDP 10 stresses clear communication between the outgoing and incoming commanders, a smooth handover of authority, and a well-planned transition of forces and equipment.
Sounds like a well-choreographed relay race. Got to pass the baton perfectly.
Great analogy. Okay, now, what happens when you hit a literal obstacle? Something that blocks your advance.
MCDP 10 does mention obstacle crossings. I have a feeling those are rarely easy.
You're right. Obstacles, those can be a real pain. A river, a minefield, a fortified enemy position, even just really dense terrain. But the Marines, they've got ways of dealing with them.
Like what?
Well, they can either bypass the obstacle, go around it, or breach it, go through it.
Bypassing sounds simpler.
It can be, but breaching, that often involves some serious firepower.
Oh, I bet. How do you breach an obstacle?
Could be clearing minefields, using explosives to create a gap in a wall, or even using special bridging equipment to get across a river. It all depends on the obstacle and the situation.
I can imagine breaching a heavily defended obstacle would be incredibly dangerous.
It definitely can be. Requires careful planning, coordination, and often specialized units and equipment. MCDP 10 talks about hasty breaches, which are all about speed and surprise.
You're like kicking down the door.
Exactly. And then there are deliberate breaches, which involve more planning and preparation, like picking the lock.
Ah, okay. So different approaches depending on the situation.
Right. But no matter how you do it, breaching is always risky, takes a lot of skill and courage from the Marines involved.
It's amazing how they've got tactics for everything. It speaks to their adaptability.
It does. They're determined to accomplish the mission no matter what's in their way. But sometimes things get really bad and a unit gets completely surrounded.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
MCDP 10 mentions breakouts from encirclement, and I can only imagine how desperate those must be.
They are a last resort when a unit is trapped, facing overwhelming odds. But even then, MCDP 10 emphasizes that there's still room for strategy.
So you don't just blindly charge out.
Nope. A successful breakout that takes careful planning, coordination, and a ton of courage.
So what does it look like? How do they do it?
Typically, the encircled force organizes itself into a few elements. One force to create a breach, then the main body follows through that gap, and then a rear guard protects the withdrawing troops.
Wow, so a coordinated, multi-pronged attack to break free.
Exactly. And speed is key. They have to move fast to exploit that initial breach before the enemy can react.
It's like a pressure valve releasing, bursting out with everything they've got.
That's a great image. It captures the intensity of a breakout perfectly. It's risky, but it shows that never give up attitude of the Marines.
They always find a way, even in the most desperate situations.
They do. It's incredible, really. From the subtle interplay of offense and defense to these specialized tactics for overcoming challenges, it's all about strategic thinking and adapting to the situation.
And those principles, they go way beyond the battlefield.
They do. They can be applied to business, politics, even everyday life.
Thinking strategically, adapting to challenges, that's something we can all learn from.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. We started with MCDP 1.0, and look where we ended up.
It's amazing what you can learn when you dive deep into a topic.
Exactly. And speaking of diving deeper, we've only just scratched the surface of these specialized tactics. I'm eager to explore those more after the break.
Me too. We'll be back in a flash, so don't go anywhere. Okay, so back to these specialized tactics. You mentioned security operations before the break. We talked about reconnaissance, gathering intel, but how does security fit in?
It's like this. Reconnaissance is your eyes and ears. Security is your shield. Both essential for protecting the force. Can't have one without the other.
So you need recon to know what to defend against, but you also need security to protect those recon assets while they're out gathering intel.
Exactly. A constant back and forth. And MCDP 1.0, it breaks down security missions into three main types: screen, guard, and cover.
Okay, so layers of protection, basically.
Think of it that way, yeah. Each layer with its own purpose, its own level of engagement with the enemy.
All right, let's unpack those layers. What's the first line of defense?
That's the screen. The eyes and ears on the front line, observing, reporting information.
So like sentries, keeping watch, but not necessarily engaging in a firefight.
Right. Their main job is early warning. They fight, but mostly in self-defense.
So about providing intel, buying time for the main force to react.
Exactly. Screening, it's often used as an economy of force measure. Cover a larger area with fewer troops.
Makes sense. Can't be everywhere at once. What about guarding forces? How are they different?
Guarding forces, they're a bit more proactive, still focused on early warning, but they can also attack, defend, or delay the enemy as needed.
So a bit more teeth, a bit more bite.
You could say that. They act as a buffer, shielding the main force from direct contact, giving them more time to react.
Sounds crucial, especially when things are changing quickly on the battlefield.
It is. And then you've got the heavy hitters, the covering force.
Okay, those are the ones I'm really curious about. What do they do?
Covering forces, they operate independently, ahead of the main force. Their job: intercept, engage, delay, disrupt the enemy before they can reach the main body.
Wow, so they're taking the fight to the enemy preemptively.
Exactly. And they've got a lot of firepower at their disposal: aviation, artillery, the works. They're flexible, powerful, all about keeping the enemy off balance.
It's incredible how each of these security missions plays a role, whether on offense or defense.
It's a team effort, every piece working together for the overall success of the mission.
Like a well-oiled machine.
That's a good way to put it. But even with the best recon and security, sometimes you need specialized tactics for specific situations.
Right, like those other tactical operations MCDP 1.0 talks about. Passages of lines, link-ups, those sorts of things.
Those are the ones. And yeah, they can get pretty intense.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with it. What exactly does a passage of lines involve?
So picture this. Two lines of troops, one stationary, the other needing to move through them.
Moving through them, like right between them.
Yeah. Forward or backward, depending on the situation.
Wow, that sounds incredibly tricky, especially under fire.
It takes a ton of coordination, precise timing. You can't have units bumping into each other, creating gaps in the line.
Like threading a needle with an entire battalion.
Pretty much. And it happens more often than you might think, especially during those security operations we were just talking about.
Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine a security force falling back. They need to hand off responsibility for their sector to the main force. That's a passage of lines. Got to be done smoothly, no gaps in the defense.
So maintaining that continuous line, even while units are moving around.
Exactly. High degree of trust and communication required.
Absolutely. Okay, now what about link-ups? Those sound a little less stressful, maybe?
They can be. Link-ups, it's about joining forces, not so much about maintaining a line.
Joining forces in the middle of, combat zone.
Could be. Two ground forces converging, a helicopter-borne unit meeting up with ground troops, even relieving a unit that's been surrounded.
So two separate elements coming together to form a stronger force.
Right. But again, coordination is key. Agreed upon meeting points, fire support plans, all that stuff.
I'm sensing a theme here. Communication is everything in these operations.
You got it. Can't afford any confusion, especially in the heat of battle. Now, reliefs in place, those are a bit different again.
Okay, how so?
This is where you completely swap out one unit for another in a specific location.
Ah, so like a tag team, one unit takes over where the other left off.
Good analogy. But it's not just about personnel. The transfer of responsibility, that has to be seamless, no interruptions in operation.
Makes sense. What kinds of situations call for relief in place?
Could be giving a unit a break, rotating fresh troops in, or repositioning forces for a new mission. Lots of reasons.
Always a strategic purpose behind it.
Always. Okay, now let's talk obstacles.
MCDP 10 does mention obstacle crossings. I'm guessing those are never fun.
Rarely. Obstacles, they can be anything. Rivers, minefields, fortified enemy positions, even just really dense terrain. But the Marines, they have ways to deal with them.
I'm all ears. What are their options?
Basically 2 options, bypass or breach.
Bypass, that's pretty self-explanatory, right? Go around the obstacle.
Pretty much. But breaching, that's where things get interesting.
Oh, I bet. How do you breach an obstacle?
Could involve mine clearing, using explosives to create a gap, or bridging equipment to cross water. It all depends on what you're facing.
Breaching a heavily defended obstacle, that's got to be one of the most dangerous things you can do on a battlefield.
It's definitely up there. Requires specialized units, equipment, tons of planning.
And nerves of steel, I'd imagine.
You got that right. MCDP 10 talks about hasty breaches. Those are all about speed and surprise.
So like a battering ram situation.
Exactly. But then you have deliberate breaches. Those take more time, more planning.
So a more calculated approach.
Right. Each has its advantages and disadvantages. Depends on the situation. But no matter how you do it, breaching is always a risky operation.
It's fascinating, all the different ways the Marines adapt to overcome these challenges.
It really is. Shows their ingenuity and their determination. But sometimes the situation is even more dire. We're talking about a unit that's completely surrounded.
Oh, wow. Breakouts from encirclement. That sounds terrifying.
It is. A last resort when all else fails. But even then, MCDP 10, it stresses that you don't just give up. There's still room for strategy.
So even surrounded, there's a plan, a way to fight your way out.
There is. It takes meticulous planning, precise timing, and a whole lot of courage. The encircled unit, they usually organize themselves into specific elements, one to create the breach, another to follow through, and a rear guard to protect the withdrawing troops.
So a coordinated effort, everyone working together to punch their way out.
Exactly. And speed is key. You have to exploit that initial breach before the enemy can react.
Like a pressure cooker exploding, just bursting out with everything you've got.
Perfect analogy. That's a breakout. It's risky, chaotic, but it shows the Marines' refusal to surrender, even in the worst possible situation.
They never give up, do they?
They don't. It's pretty inspiring, actually. From the interplay of offense and defense to these specialized tactics, it all comes back to strategic thinking, adapting to the situation, never giving up.
And those are lessons we can apply to any field, really.
Absolutely. Think about the obstacles you face in your own life, your own work. How can you be more adaptable, more strategic in how you overcome those challenges?
That's a great question. It makes you realize that we can all learn from the Marines.
Exactly. And thinking about all this, it really highlights the importance of adaptability, not just reacting to the enemy, but building that adaptability into everything you do.
It baked into the culture of the organization.
Right. Because in the real world, things rarely go according to plan. You need leaders at every level who can assess the situation, understand the intent, and make adjustments without losing sight of the goal.
That kind of decentralized decision-making, that's pretty powerful.
It is. Especially in a fast-moving environment, things change so quickly, you need people on the ground who can make those calls.
So it's about having a plan, but also being flexible, empowering those closest to the action.
Precisely. And this principle, this adaptability, it goes way beyond the battlefield. It applies to business, politics, even just navigating everyday life.
When you think about it, we're all facing obstacles, challenges all the time.
Exactly. And by being adaptable, by thinking strategically, you can turn those challenges into opportunities.
It's a shift in mindset, really.
It is. And that brings me to my final thought for our listener today. Think about your own field, your own challenges. What are the offensive and defensive strategies you use? How can understanding these concepts from a military perspective give you a new way of looking at your work?
That's a powerful question, because you're right. These concepts, they're everywhere. It's not just about military operations. It's about strategy in all its forms.
Exactly. A company launching a new product, that's offensive. Investing in cybersecurity to protect their data, that's defensive.
Always working together, two sides of the same coin.
And by understanding that interplay, you can make better decisions no matter what field you're in.
It's amazing how studying military strategy can teach us so much about other fields.
It's all about making those connections, and that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding.
Absolutely. You start with one topic, and it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank our listener for joining us on this journey into the heart of Marine Corps operations. We've just scratched the surface of MCDP 10, but hopefully we've sparked some new ideas.
Definitely. Keep exploring these concepts. Apply them to your own challenges.
Yeah.
You might be surprised what you discover.
Embrace that curiosity, that adaptability. Who knows what breakthroughs await when we start thinking like Marines?
That's a great way to end this deep dive.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another exploration into the world of knowledge and ideas. You've hit on something key there. Adaptability. It does seem to be woven into all these concepts we've been discussing.
It really is, and not just about reacting to the enemy, you know. The Marine Corps bakes adaptability into everything, pretty much. How their units are organized, how they train, even the mindset they try to cultivate in individual Marines.
So it's like more than a flexible plan. It's a whole culture of adaptability.
You got it. Because out there, in the chaos of battle, things rarely go exactly as planned.
Right. Makes sense.
You need leaders at every level who can assess, think on their feet, make adjustments without losing sight of the big picture.
That's a lot of responsibility on those junior leaders.
It is, but it's essential, especially in modern warfare. Things change so rapidly, you can't wait for orders from the top every time.
You need people who can make decisions in the moment.
Exactly. Decentralized decision-making, it's crucial for success.
So a balance between a clear strategy and the flexibility to adapt at the ground level.
You got it. And this principle, this adaptability, it's not just for the battlefield,
Right. I can see how it applies to all sorts of fields.
Business, politics, even just navigating the ups and downs of everyday life, being adaptable, making decisions under pressure, those are valuable skills.
For sure. So thinking about that, what are some of the obstacles, metaphorically speaking, that people face in their own fields?
Oh, all sorts of things. A tight deadline, competition heating up, a sudden shift in the market, whatever it might be.
It's like those challenges that are often opportunities in disguise.
I like that. And approaching them with this mindset, this adaptability, that's how you turn challenges into advantages.
It's all about perspective.
Exactly. And that brings me to my final thought for our listeners today.
Okay, shoot.
Think about your field, your work.
Yeah.
What are some of the offensive and defensive strategies you use? How can understanding those concepts, from a military perspective, give you a fresh take on your own work?
That's a really great question. It really brings home the point that these ideas, these principles, they have applications everywhere.
Everywhere. It's not just about fighting battles, it's about strategy, period.
So give us an example.
Sure. A company launching a new product, that's an offensive move. Investing in cybersecurity to protect their data, that's defensive.
Two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. And by understanding how they work together, you can make smarter, more strategic decisions no matter what you're doing.
It's fascinating how much we can learn from studying military strategy.
It really is. And that's what I love about these deep dives. You never know where they'll lead.
You start with one thing, and it just opens up a whole new world of knowledge.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this exploration of Marine Corps operations.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We've only scratched the surface of MCDP 10, but hopefully we've given you some food for thought.
Keep those brains working. Keep exploring these ideas.
Apply them to your own lives, your work. Embrace that spirit of curiosity, that adaptability. You never know what you might discover.
That's a perfect way to wrap things up. Thanks again for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another adventure in the world of ideas.